Alpha King Thane Ironwood stood before his entire court and called Alolan Marsh a mistake the moon herself would eventually correct. He said it after she'd stumbled through a formal presentation ceremony, nervous and unpolished in a way that embarrassed him in front of visiting dignitaries from 3 allied kingdoms. He said it loud enough for the whole hall to hear, loud enough that Alolan's face went white with humiliation before she fled the ceremony entirely, leaving 200 nobles to whisper about the Omega Healer's daughter, who clearly wasn't fit to stand beside their king. Thane didn't chase after her. He didn't apologize. He told himself, watching her go, that a king couldn't afford a mate who embarrassed him in front of potential allies, whatever the moon's bond might have decreed. He had no idea, in that arrogant, careless moment, exactly how literally the moon herself would take that insult. 3 nights later, on the full moon that marked the anniversary of his coronation, Thane Ironwood woke unable to shift, unable to access even the faintest trace of his alpha strength. His claws wouldn't extend. His enhanced senses had vanished entirely. He stood in his chambers, human and utterly powerless for the first time since childhood, and understood, with dawning horror, that something considerably beyond simple bad luck had just stripped him of everything that made him fit to rule. The Moon Priestess arrived at dawn, summoned by his panicked advisors, and delivered a verdict that shattered Ironwood's entire understanding of his own reign. "The Mother Moon has withdrawn her blessing," she said, voice carrying an ancient authority that left no room for argument. "You humiliated the mate she chose for you, before your entire court, without cause or mercy. Until you understand precisely what you've lost and prove yourself worthy of reclaiming it, you will remain exactly what you called her, unworthy, ordinary, stripped of every gift that once made you king." Thane Ironwood had insulted his true mate in front of 200 witnesses. He was about to spend considerably more than 200 witnesses' worth of humiliation learning exactly how devastating that mistake would prove. Ironwood Kingdom had ruled the Western Territories for 4 centuries through an unbroken line of Alpha Kings whose strength, according to ancient tradition, flowed directly from the Mother Moon's continued favor, a blessing that manifested not simply through enhanced physical ability, but through an entire kingdom's prosperity, its harvests, its protection from the wasting sicknesses that occasionally plagued lesser territories. Thane Ironwood inherited that throne at 22, following his father's sudden death, and spent the following 3 years proving himself a capable, if increasingly arrogant, ruler, successful military campaigns against border raiders, profitable trade negotiations with neighboring kingdoms, and a growing, uncomfortable belief that his considerable personal strength and political success reflected his own individual merit rather than the Mother Moon's continued, conditional blessing. He found Alolan Marsh during a routine visit to Ironwood's eastern villages, a healer's daughter whose quiet, dedicated medical service to her community had earned genuine local respect despite her complete lack of noble standing or political sophistication. The mate bond struck between them with the moon's characteristic, undeniable certainty, and Thane, initially delighted by his good fortune, brought her to his palace with genuine, if somewhat careless, affection. The difficulty emerged gradually, as Alolan struggled to adapt to palace life's considerable formal demands, court etiquette, political maneuvering, the countless small social skills that noble-born partners absorbed from childhood, but that a village healer's daughter had never once needed to develop. Thane's patience, worn thin by 3 years of increasingly unchecked royal privilege, gradually curdled into embarrassment and, eventually, open contempt for exactly the qualities that had once seemed charmingly genuine: her nervous uncertainty in formal settings, her occasional social missteps, her evident discomfort navigating a court culture entirely foreign to her humble upbringing. The formal presentation ceremony, meant to introduce Alolan properly to Ironwood's allied dignitaries as Thane's confirmed mate, became instead the catastrophic breaking point of months of accumulated, unaddressed resentment. Thane's careless, devastating public humiliation delivered not as a single moment of uncharacteristic cruelty, but as the culmination of a slow, corrosive contempt he'd never once bothered examining or addressing throughout their entire relationship. The Mother Moon, watching this slow betrayal of her chosen bond unfold, had apparently reached the limits of her considerable patience. The formal presentation ceremony had been planned for months, an elaborate diplomatic gathering meant to demonstrate Ironwood Kingdom's stability and prosperity to visiting dignitaries from 3 allied territories, precisely the kind of high-stakes political theater that Thane had come to genuinely relish over 3 years of increasingly confident rule. Eloan had prepared as thoroughly as her limited months of palace tutoring allowed, though genuine nervousness made the elaborate ceremonial protocol considerably more difficult to execute smoothly than her private practice sessions had suggested. The disaster began with a minor stumble during her formal presentation walk, considerably less catastrophic than Eloan's own mortified reaction suggested, but enough to draw scattered, poorly concealed amusement from several younger nobles positioned near the ceremonial platform. It escalated when her carefully rehearsed formal greeting, meant to properly welcome the visiting dignitaries in the traditional ceremonial language Ironwood's court still favored for such significant occasions, came out garbled and uncertain, months of careful memorization dissolving entirely under the overwhelming pressure of 200 watching, judgmental eyes. Perhaps Lord Aldwyn, one of the visiting dignitaries, observed with poorly disguised condescension, Ironwood's king might benefit from additional preparation time before formally presenting his chosen mate to allied courts. The comment, delivered with careful diplomatic phrasing but unmistakable underlying insult, struck Thane with an embarrassment that 3 years of increasingly unchecked pride had left him entirely unprepared to manage gracefully. "She's an Omega healer's daughter," he said, the words tearing loose before proper consideration could temper their devastating cruelty, not accustomed to the considerable sophistication this court's formal ceremonies require. "I confess, gentlemen, I sometimes wonder whether the Mother Moon's bond truly reflects wisdom, or simply an unfortunate accident I've been left to manage as gracefully as circumstances allow." The hall fell into stunned, uncomfortable silence, several nobles exchanging shocked glances at their king's unprecedented public cruelty toward his own formally bonded mate. Eloan stood frozen at the ceremonial platform's center, her face draining of color as 3 years of accumulated small humiliations and dismissive comments suddenly, devastatingly crystallized into this single, catastrophic public condemnation. "I am so sorry," she said, voice barely audible despite the hall's complete silence, "for embarrassing you, Your Majesty." She fled the ceremony before Thane could offer any further devastating commentary, or before he could recognize, in that moment, exactly how thoroughly his careless cruelty had just shattered whatever remained of their genuine bond's foundation. He didn't follow her, he told himself, accepting the visiting dignitary's careful, diplomatic reassurances regarding the minor ceremonial disruption, that pursuing her would only further undermine the formal proceedings' remaining diplomatic purpose. He had no idea, resuming the ceremony's formal business with practiced, unconcerned composure, that he'd just committed the single most catastrophic mistake of his entire reign. Thane woke on the 3rd night following the ceremony with an unfamiliar, deeply unsettling wrongness pervading his entire body, a sensation he couldn't immediately identify, though something instinctive suggested it carried devastating significance. He attempted his usual pre-dawn shift, the practiced ritual he'd performed thousands of times throughout his life without conscious effort, and found nothing responded.
No transformation. No enhanced sensory awareness.
Simply his ordinary human body, stubbornly, terrifyingly refusing to access abilities he'd relied upon since childhood. "Something's wrong," he told his chief advisor, Lord Bramwell, panic evident beneath his carefully controlled voice as the older man arrived, summoned urgently before dawn had fully broken. I can't shift. I can't access any of my enhanced abilities. Nothing is responding properly. Bramwell's expression, upon witnessing Thane's genuine, escalating panic firsthand, shifted from initial confusion toward dawning, horrified understanding. Your Majesty, he said carefully, this occurred on the anniversary of your coronation. The same night, if I recall correctly, as your formal ceremony with the visiting dignitaries. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, Bramwell said, that we summon the Moon Priestess immediately. If this represents what I fear it might, Your Majesty, we require her guidance considerably more urgently than any palace physician could possibly provide. The Moon Priestess arrived within hours, an ancient woman whose considerable spiritual authority commanded genuine respect throughout Ironwood's entire kingdom, her expression grave and unforgiving as she assessed Thane's panicked, powerless state with careful, deliberate examination. The Mother Moon has withdrawn her blessing, she announced finally, her voice carrying an ancient, unmistakable authority that silenced the assembled council's nervous murmuring immediately. Completely and deliberately, Your Majesty, in direct response to your public humiliation of the mate she personally selected for your throne. This is temporary, Thane said, desperate hope warring against dawning, horrified understanding. Surely some ceremony, some formal apology, might restore? The Mother Moon's blessing is not restored through simple ceremony, the priestess interrupted, her tone leaving no room for the kind of easy, convenient absolution Thane's panicked hope had briefly grasped toward. You humiliated Aloan Marsh before 200 witnesses, dismissing the very bond the Moon herself confirmed as unworthy accident rather than sacred gift. Until you genuinely understand precisely what you've lost and prove yourself worthy of reclaiming both her trust and the Moon's continued favor, you will remain exactly what your careless cruelty called her, unworthy, ordinary, stripped of every gift your birthright once provided. How long? Thane asked, voice breaking with genuine, overwhelming panic. How long must this punishment continue? Until you've earned its ending, the priestess said simply. The Mother Moon doesn't operate according to convenient timelines, Your Majesty. She operates according to genuine transformation, and I suspect, given the depth of arrogance evident in your careless cruelty, that genuine transformation will require considerably more time and genuine effort than your current panic suggests you're prepared to accept. She departed the palace within the hour, leaving Thane Ironwood to confront, for the first time in his entire privileged life, exactly what existing without his alpha strength, his enhanced abilities, and his kingdom's unquestioning deference actually required. News of Thane's stripped abilities spread through Ironwood's court within days. Despite his advisors' careful, desperate attempts at discretion, the political implications proving considerably too significant to genuinely conceal from a nobility whose entire understanding of legitimate rule rested on the Mother Moon's continued, visible blessing. Your Majesty, Lord Bramwell advised, several days into Thane's powerless state, genuine concern evident beneath his careful diplomatic phrasing, several council members have begun quietly questioning whether continued rule remains appropriate, given the Moon Priestess's public confirmation of the Mother Moon's withdrawn favor. I am still the rightful king, Thane said, though considerably less confident conviction underlay the claim than his previous, unquestioned authority had once demonstrated. Legally, certainly, Bramwell acknowledged carefully. Though I would be remiss not to mention, Your Majesty, that several allied territories have already begun making careful diplomatic inquiries regarding Ironwood's continued stability, given widespread awareness of your current circumstances. The following weeks brought a devastating education in exactly how thoroughly Thane's unchecked alpha privilege had shielded him from genuinely understanding his own kingdom's actual functioning. Council meetings, once conducted with his effortless, enhanced authority commanding immediate deference, now required considerably more careful, deliberate persuasion. His arguments alone, without the intimidating presence his alpha strength had once provided, proving considerably less immediately compelling to advisors accustomed to his previous, unquestioned dominance. Military training sessions, once opportunities to demonstrate his considerable alpha combat superiority, became genuinely humbling experiences as Thane discovered exactly how much his previous battlefield success had relied on enhanced physical abilities rather than genuine tactical skill or hard-won combat experience. "You're improving," his training master observed, several weeks into Thane's humbling adjustment to ordinary human physical limitations. "Though I confess, Your Majesty, watching you struggle through basic combat drills that once seemed effortless has proven considerably illuminating regarding exactly how much your previous confidence relied on abilities rather than genuine skill." The observation, delivered without particular cruelty, but with unmistakable, uncomfortable honesty, struck Thane with growing, humbling clarity regarding exactly how thoroughly his 3 years of privileged rule had prevented genuine self-examination. It was during this increasingly humbling period of adjustment that Thane finally began, hesitantly and with considerable internal resistance, to genuinely consider exactly what his careless cruelty toward Aloan had actually cost her, not simply the single devastating public humiliation, but months of accumulated small dismissals and contemptuous impatience he'd never once bothered examining throughout their entire relationship. He requested a private meeting with her 3 weeks into his powerless state, understanding, with growing, uncomfortable clarity, that genuine transformation would require considerably more than simple, convenient regret. Aloan had relocated to a quiet wing of the palace following the catastrophic ceremony, maintaining careful, deliberate distance from Thane throughout the weeks following his stripped abilities revelation, her own considerable hurt requiring genuine time and space before any renewed contact felt remotely bearable. She agreed to his requested meeting with visible reluctance, arriving at the designated garden location with careful, guarded composure that immediately confirmed exactly how thoroughly his careless cruelty had damaged whatever genuine trust their bond had once carried. "I understand if you'd rather not speak with me at all," Thane began, uncertain humility considerably unfamiliar following 3 years of confident, unchecked authority. "I simply needed the chance to properly apologize, without the political complications our formal relationship's public dimension usually requires." "You've had 3 years to properly apologize for considerably smaller cruelties than what you demonstrated at that ceremony," Aloan said, old hurt evident beneath her careful composure. "Forgive me if I'm somewhat skeptical regarding the genuine sincerity of this particular, suddenly urgent regret, given its remarkably convenient timing alongside your own stripped royal abilities." The observation landed with devastating, uncomfortable accuracy, forcing Thane to confront exactly how thoroughly his current apology might genuinely reflect self-interested panic rather than authentic remorse. "You're right to question my sincerity," he said, after a long, uncomfortable moment of genuine self-examination. "I won't pretend my current circumstances haven't motivated this conversation's urgency. But I want you to understand, Aloan, I've spent these past weeks genuinely confronting exactly how much smaller, accumulated cruelty preceded that final, catastrophic ceremony. I dismissed your genuine effort to adapt to palace life as embarrassing inadequacy, rather than recognizing the considerable courage it required for someone with your background to attempt navigating an entirely foreign social world." Aloan studied him carefully, old hurt warring against cautious, uncertain hope that his current humility might reflect something considerably more genuine than simple, self-interested panic. "Why does it matter to you now?" she asked, when it apparently didn't matter throughout 3 years of accumulated small dismissals. Because losing my alpha strength has forced me to genuinely understand for the first time exactly what existing without unquestioned deference and enhanced ability actually requires, Thane admitted honestly. I've spent 3 years believing my success reflected personal merit rather than considerable privilege I never once properly examined. Watching my council's advisors struggle to take me genuinely seriously, without my previous intimidating presence to compel their deference, has taught me more about genuine leadership these past 3 weeks than my previous 3 years of unchecked authority ever managed to demonstrate. That's a start, Eloan said carefully. Though I'd note, Thane, that genuine transformation typically requires considerably more than simply confronting personal humiliation. If you genuinely intend to change, that change needs to extend beyond simply how you treat me, toward how you treat everyone whose position leaves them vulnerable to your authority's careless exercise. I understand, Thane said. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, Eloan. I simply wanted you to know that I've genuinely begun confronting exactly what my careless cruelty actually cost you, beyond the single, catastrophic ceremony that made that cruelty publicly undeniable. Eloan studied him for a long, considering moment, old hurt gradually giving way to cautious, uncertain willingness to observe whether his claimed transformation genuinely extended beyond convenient, self-interested words. Prove it, she said finally, through consistent action, over considerable time, rather than simply through this single conversation's carefully offered apology. I won't promise forgiveness, Thane, but I'm willing to observe whether genuine change actually follows this particular crisis's uncomfortable clarity. The following months brought Thane through a genuinely humbling education in leadership considerably different from anything his previous 3 years of privileged, unquestioned rule had ever required him to develop. Without his alpha strength's intimidating presence, he discovered, gradually and often painfully, that genuine authority required considerably more deliberate skill than simple, enhanced physical dominance had ever demanded. Careful listening, genuine persuasion, the patient work of earning trust through consistent, demonstrated competence rather than simply commanding, unquestioning deference. You're asking questions in council sessions you never previously bothered raising, Lord Bramwell observed, several months into Thane's continued powerless state, genuine approval evident beneath his careful professional assessment. I confess, Your Majesty, I find myself considerably more optimistic regarding this kingdom's genuine governance than I've felt throughout most of your previous reign. I'm asking questions, Thane said, because I no longer have the luxury of simply assuming my instincts require no genuine examination. Without enhanced authority compelling automatic deference, I've discovered that genuine wisdom requires considerably more humility than I previously understood. He began, gradually, extending this hard-won humility beyond simply his relationship with Eloan, toward every aspect of his kingdom's actual governance, visiting Ironwood's villages personally rather than relying entirely on filtered reports, genuinely listening to concerns his previous privileged distance had never bothered properly considering, discovering, with growing discomfort, exactly how many small injustices his unchecked authority had previously allowed to flourish unchallenged. Throughout his kingdom's actual daily operation, the eastern villages have been struggling with unfair taxation for over a year, he reported to his council, several months into his humbling education, genuine outrage evident in his voice regarding an injustice his previous privileged distance had entirely failed to notice. I want this addressed immediately, and I want considerably more rigorous oversight established to ensure similar exploitation doesn't continue unchecked throughout other territories I've apparently been neglecting to properly monitor. Eloan, observing this gradual, genuine transformation from careful, continued distance, found herself increasingly, cautiously impressed by evidence that Thane's claimed change genuinely extended beyond simple, self-interested words toward substantive, demonstrated action. You've changed considerably, she observed, during one of their increasingly regular, though still carefully measured, conversations several months into his continued powerless state. I've been forced to genuinely examine exactly how much privilege I previously mistook for personal merit, Thane said. I won't pretend this transformation has been comfortable alone. But I understand now, considerably more thoroughly than my previous 3 years of unchecked authority ever allowed, exactly what genuine leadership actually requires. Not simply commanding deference through intimidating strength, but earning trust through consistent, demonstrated care for the people my authority actually affects. That's meaningful progress, Eloan acknowledged carefully. Though I'd note, Thane, genuine transformation typically requires considerably more than several months' worth of demonstrated change, particularly given 3 years of accumulated privileged carelessness that preceded it. I understand, Thane said. I'm not asking for immediate, complete restoration of what my cruelty destroyed. I'm simply asking for the continued opportunity to demonstrate genuine, sustained change for as long as that demonstration genuinely requires. It would take, ultimately, considerably longer than either of them initially anticipated before the Moon Priestess's promised restoration finally, genuinely arrived. Thane's continued powerless state, extending now nearly 6 months, had created exactly the kind of political vulnerability several ambitious court factions had begun actively, calculatedly exploiting. Lord Aldwin, the same visiting dignitary whose condescending observation had originally sparked Thane's catastrophic public humiliation of Eloan, returned to Ironwood's court with considerably more calculated, ambitious purpose than his original diplomatic visit had demonstrated, understanding, with cold political precision, exactly how thoroughly Thane's continued weakness had destabilized the kingdom's traditional unquestioning deference. Several council members have approached me. He confided carefully to a cluster of similarly ambitious nobles. During a private gathering Thane's diminished authority had entirely failed to detect, regarding whether Ironwood's continued stability might benefit from more decisive leadership than a king currently stripped of his most basic royal abilities can genuinely provide. The calculated conspiracy that gradually developed over the following weeks aimed not at simple political maneuvering, but at outright, formal challenge to Thane's continued legitimacy, a coalition of ambitious nobles preparing to formally petition for his removal, citing the Mother Moon's publicly confirmed withdrawal of blessing as unmistakable evidence of his fundamental unfitness for continued rule. Eloan discovered the conspiracy first, her continued careful attention to palace gossip and genuine relationships with palace staff, relationships Thane's previous privileged distance had never bothered developing, providing considerably earlier warning than his own diminished political awareness had managed to detect. You're in genuine danger, she told him urgently, several weeks into her careful investigation confirming the conspiracy's actual scope. Lord Aldwin has gathered considerable support among the council's more ambitious factions, and they're preparing formal challenge to your continued legitimacy, citing your stripped abilities as unmistakable proof of unfitness. How thorough is this conspiracy? Thane asked, genuine alarm evident beneath his considerably more measured, humbled response than his previous privileged confidence might once have demonstrated. Thorough enough that formal action appears imminent, Eloan said. Within days, possibly, given how carefully they've apparently coordinated their approach. Thane absorbed this devastating threat with considerably more genuine strategic thought than his previous, entitled confidence had ever required him to develop, understanding, with hard-won clarity, that surviving this crisis would require exactly the kind of demonstrated competence and genuine alliance-building his months of humbling transformation had gradually taught him to value. I need to understand exactly who genuinely supports this conspiracy, he said, and exactly who might remain persuadable, given genuine evidence of the transformation I've spent these past months actually demonstrating. I can help, Eloan offered, something in her careful, measured tone suggesting genuine willingness to actively support him, rather than simply observing his continued transformation from cautious distance. I've developed considerable relationships throughout this palace these past months, Thane, precisely the kind of genuine connections your previous privileged distance never bothered cultivating. The offer, delivered with careful, deliberate consideration rather than immediate, uncomplicated trust, nonetheless marked a significant shift in their careful, gradually rebuilding relationship. Aloan's willingness to actively assist him, despite everything his previous cruelty had cost her, suggesting genuine, if still cautious, belief that his demonstrated transformation carried authentic weight. The formal challenge, when it finally arrived, took the shape of an emergency council session convened by Lord Aldwyn's coalition, demanding Thane's immediate abdication in favor of a carefully selected alternative candidate whose own claimed lineage provided sufficient legitimacy to satisfy traditional succession requirements. Your Majesty, Lord Aldwyn began, addressing the assembled council with practiced, calculated authority. The Mother Moon's public withdrawal of blessing, now extending nearly 7 months, provides unmistakable evidence regarding your fundamental unfitness for continued rule. This council formally requests your voluntary abdication in the kingdom's genuine best interests. Thane, considerably more prepared for this confrontation than his opponents apparently anticipated, rose to address the assembled council with a measured, deliberate authority that owed nothing to his previously intimidating alpha presence, and considerably more to months of hard-won, genuine leadership development. I understand, he said, why my current circumstances raise legitimate concern regarding this kingdom's continued stability. I won't dismiss those concerns as illegitimate, Lord Aldwyn, given the genuine severity of what my own careless cruelty originally caused. Several council members, expecting defensive denial rather than genuine acknowledgement, exchanged surprised glances at this unexpected, humbled response. However, Thane continued, I would ask this council to consider carefully exactly what genuine evidence exists regarding my current fitness to rule, beyond simply my stripped alpha abilities' undeniable, but ultimately incomplete, measure of leadership capacity. He proceeded, methodically and with considerable, hard-won preparation, to detail exactly the substantive governance improvements his months of powerless humility had produced, the corrected taxation injustices throughout the eastern villages, the genuine policy reforms developed through actual, careful listening to concerns his previous privileged distance had entirely ignored, the demonstrated capacity for genuine leadership that didn't depend entirely on intimidating, enhanced physical presence. Several of you, he said, addressing the assembled council directly, have witnessed these changes personally throughout these past 7 months. I would ask you to genuinely consider whether a king who has demonstrated substantive growth, humility, and improved governance represents greater danger to this kingdom's stability than one who ruled through unchecked privilege and careless cruelty, however impressive his enhanced physical abilities once appeared. Elder Vasquez, the same respected council member who'd once championed Corin's legitimate succession in an entirely different kingdom's crisis, though Ironwood's own considerably more traditional elder Havermore now occupied similar position of respected authority, rose to address the assembled nobility with careful, measured consideration. I would note, Elder Havermore said, that this council's original concern regarding King Thane's stripped abilities centered legitimately on questions of fitness to rule. Having personally witnessed considerable, genuine improvement in his actual governance throughout these past months, I find myself increasingly persuaded that abdication, at this particular moment, might prove considerably premature, particularly given the Moon Priestess's original assurance that genuine transformation, rather than simple political convenience, ultimately determines when the Mother Moon's blessing might genuinely return. The formal vote that followed, considerably more contentious than Lord Aldwyn's coalition had originally anticipated, ultimately confirmed Thane's continued legitimate rule by a narrow but genuine majority, his months of demonstrated, substantive transformation proving sufficient, if barely, to overcome his opponent's calculated political challenge. Lord Aldwyn departed the council chamber in furious, humiliated defeat, though the underlying political tension his failed conspiracy had exposed suggested Thane's continued rule would require considerably more sustained, demonstrated competence before genuine, comprehensive political stability might finally be restored. The months following Thane's narrow political survival brought continued, gradual transformation, his humbled leadership style proving increasingly, genuinely effective at rebuilding the kind of authentic trust and governance stability his previous 3 years of privileged authority had never actually required him to develop. Alone, observing this sustained, demonstrated growth over the following months, found her own careful, guarded distance gradually giving way to something considerably warmer, genuine trust slowly rebuilding through Thane's consistent, sustained demonstration that his transformation reflected authentic character growth rather than simply temporary, self-interested crisis response. "I've been thinking," she told him, nearly a full year after that catastrophic ceremony had originally shattered their bond's foundation, both of them sitting together in the same garden where his initial, uncertain apology had first begun their careful, gradual reconciliation, about exactly how much you've genuinely changed these past 12 months. "I hope you find that change genuine," Thane said carefully, still maintaining the humble, deliberate caution his hard-won transformation had taught him, rather than presuming forgiveness his previous privileged confidence might once have simply assumed. "I do," Eloan said. "I've watched you rebuild this kingdom's actual governance through genuine care and demonstrated competence, rather than simply commanding unquestioning deference through intimidating strength. I've watched you survive genuine political crisis through substantive, earned respect rather than enhanced physical dominance. I think, Thane, that whatever the Mother Moon originally intended by stripping your abilities, it appears to have achieved exactly the transformation she apparently believed necessary." That same evening, on the full moon marking exactly 1 year since Thane's original, devastating humiliation of Eloan, the Moon Priestess returned unannounced to Ironwood's palace, her expression carrying considerably more genuine warmth than her original, unforgiving verdict had once demonstrated. "The Mother Moon has observed considerable, genuine transformation throughout this past year," she announced, addressing Thane's assembled court with careful, deliberate authority. "Not simply convenient, temporary regret, but substantive character growth reflected through demonstrated action, sustained humility, and genuine leadership development that owes nothing to previously unchecked, privileged authority." She turned to address Thane directly. "The Mother Moon's blessing returns, Your Majesty, not as automatic restoration of previous entitlement, but as genuine recognition that you've finally, authentically earned the considerable responsibility her original gift always represented." Thane felt the return of his alpha strength with an overwhelming, humbling rush considerably different from his previous, careless assumption of birthright entitlement. Enhanced senses, physical strength, the full range of abilities he'd once taken entirely for granted, now understood, with hard-won clarity, as genuine gift rather than simple, unquestioned privilege. "I understand now," he told the assembled court, voice carrying genuine, humbled gratitude rather than his previous, careless confidence, exactly what the Mother Moon's blessing actually represents. Not simply enhanced ability granted automatically through birthright, but sacred trust that requires continuous, demonstrated worthiness to genuinely deserve. He turned to Eloan, standing among the assembled witnesses with an expression that finally, genuinely reflected complete, unguarded warmth rather than careful, protective distance. "And I understand," he said, "exactly what I nearly lost. Through careless cruelty, I should never have allowed myself to demonstrate in the first place. Alolan Marsh, I don't simply want my restored alpha strength to mark this moment. I want to formally, publicly acknowledge exactly how genuinely undeserving I once proved of the extraordinary gift your bond always represented, and to ask, with considerably more humility than I once possessed, whether you might allow me the continued opportunity to prove myself genuinely worthy of that gift for the remainder of our lives together. Alolan, tears bright with overwhelming, hard-won joy, crossed the distance between them without hesitation. I think, she said, you've already proven that, considerably more thoroughly than a single formal request could ever fully capture. Yes, Thane. I choose you, not the king who once carelessly humiliated me, but the man who spent an entire year genuinely, authentically earning back everything his cruelty once nearly destroyed. 2 years after the Mother Moon's blessing finally, genuinely returned, Ironwood Kingdom had transformed into a territory considerably different from the privileged, unchecked authority that had once characterized Thane's original 3 years of careless rule. The governance reforms he developed throughout his humbling, powerless year had become permanent, institutionalized practice, regular village visits, genuine consultation with communities his previous privileged distance had once entirely ignored, careful oversight preventing exactly the kind of unchecked exploitation his own earlier negligence had once allowed to flourish unchallenged. Alolan, formally established now as Ironwood's genuinely respected queen, had developed her own considerable influence throughout the kingdom's governance, her natural healing skills and genuine connection with common villagers proving invaluable in identifying exactly the kind of grassroots concerns that palace-bound advisors, however well-intentioned, might otherwise have entirely missed. You've built something genuinely remarkable, Lord Bramwell observed, during a formal council session marking the 2nd anniversary of Thane's restored alpha strength, from what once seemed an unrecoverable political and personal catastrophe. We've built it together, Thane corrected, glancing toward Alolan with genuine warmth that had, over 2 years of continued deliberate partnership, become entirely natural rather than carefully performed effort. I understand now, considerably more thoroughly than my original 3 years of privileged rule ever taught me, exactly what genuine partnership actually requires: humility, continuous effort, and the willingness to genuinely earn trust rather than simply assuming it as automatic entitlement. On the 2nd anniversary of that devastating, transformative full moon, Thane and Alolan stood together in Ironwood's palace gardens, watching their young daughter, born 18 months into their genuinely rebuilt partnership, chase fireflies through the same quiet space where their careful, hard-won reconciliation had first, hesitantly begun. Any regrets? Alolan asked, echoing a question that had, by now, become something of a treasured tradition between them. Only that it took losing everything I once took entirely for granted, Thane said, before I genuinely understood exactly what I actually possessed. But I've stopped allowing that regret to define our story's genuine ending. We took something my own careless cruelty nearly destroyed completely, and we rebuilt it into something considerably stronger and more authentic than my original, privileged arrogance ever could have produced. I think, Alolan said, that's precisely what the Mother Moon intended, watching your original humiliation of our bond. Not simply punishment, but genuine transformation. The difference between a king who commanded deference through intimidating strength and one who genuinely earns respect through demonstrated humility, care, and authentic partnership. Above them, the full moon rose bright and clear over a kingdom finally, genuinely reckoning with exactly what authentic leadership required, and Thane Ironwood, watching his family with a gratitude 2 years of hard-won transformation had taught him never again to take for granted, understood precisely how devastating and ultimately how necessary his catastrophic fall from careless privilege had genuinely proven to be.
The end.